Big changes are coming to San Diego as the new marijuana economy gets into gear. Starting in January, adults over the age of 21 can purchase recreational marijuana and consume it in their homes. As San Diego shifts to deal with a new weed economy, the Union-Tribune is beefing up coverage of the subject. I spoke with Gary Robbins about his reporting and what consumers need to know about marijuana. I'm Daniel Wheaton, and this is Refocus. Gary Robbins, you've been covering science for some time, and part of that beat, it now includes recreational marijuana. With some of the changes in the law, it is kind of confusing exactly what is going on. So why don't you walk us through what is and what isn't legal right now in San Diego?
You're right, it is confusing. About a year ago, voters approved Proposition 64, and that said you can smoke marijuana recreationally. You need to do it in private. You can possess it. Under certain circumstances, you can even transport it. But until now, you haven't been able to buy it in a store, in a dispensary, whatever you want to call them. That all changes during the first week of January. So the state is gearing up to allow a certain number of licensed stores to sell it beginning around January 1st. Mm-hmm. It looks like there are going to be approximately 12 stores in the city of San Diego. There won't be any in other cities in our county or the unincorporated area right away. A lot of cities are stepping back and seeing what's going to happen in San Diego. But there will be places that you can go buy it. I got to say, I was surprised to learn through my visits that a lot of them look like Starbucks. Mm-hmm. They look like boutiques. You know, they're really not quite what I imagined them to be in some cases. They're mostly in light industrial areas. One of them over by the Miramar MCAS is only about 100 feet from a McDonald's, which really cracked me up. So they seem perfectly located. But January 1st, that's when we moved to recreational sales of marijuana in California.
Mm-hmm. And there are some limits as to what people can purchase and possess, correct?
Right. You can possess if you're just an average person, you can possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana, and you can keep it in your home. We've been talking to attorneys about things like, well, can I go out on my veranda or in my backyard if it's a private home and smoke? The answer is probably yes, but it depends on your neighbors. If your neighbors complain to the city, that can cause a problem. But for most, in most instances, you can possess it. If it's in a sealed container, Daniel, you can move it, like you can take it from one place to another in your car. And I really stress that people think about that. If you go to a dispensary or a store and you purchase it, do not open it under any conditions when you're going from point A to B. Because if you're stopped by authorities, then it really becomes a problem.
Mm. And so what are some of the, I guess, concerns that people opening up these new shops have with getting everything set up?
Well, they're trying to figure out whether there's going to be a huge demand or not. They need to know how many employees to have and how much marijuana to have on hand. There's a feeling that there's going to be an increase. Obviously, you're opening up an entirely new market, but they don't know how big it's going to be. A lot of people think that there will be a spike in sales during, say, that first week, because there's a huge curiosity factor, and then it'll level off. But no one's really sure. So they're trying to figure out what is their inventory and how are they going to secure their cash sales? Because, marijuana is still against federal law. So this is a cash-only business. If you're one of these people that run one of these places, you can only do business with cash. That's why they have cash machines in most of these stores. But that means you have to get it to a bank. You can't just fill out a deposit slip and do like regular banking. So banking is a big concern. There are new rules that are going into effect that involve how a lot of marijuana, particularly edible marijuana, is packaged and what it says on the packages. This has been an issue. A lot of people do like edible marijuana, but its effect on people varies greatly. So how I would experience it could be very different than how you experience it. There appears to be some differences in gender. There are differences on what mood you're in, whether you've been drinking. There's all these factors. The government has put together better rules on this. So they're trying to convey the point that the packaging should not appeal to children, for example. A lot of the packaging that I've seen in stores does appeal to adolescents. It's meant to be bright and very attractive. Some of the stuff on there can be hard to understand. Not everybody knows what THC is, so just telling me that there are, say, 10 milligrams of THC which causes the high in marijuana, it may not, be enough for people. So better packaging, clearer packaging, how and when it can be sold.
Mm-hmm. And that's one thing. A lot of people tend to liken marijuana to, like, let's say, alcohol in a sense. But the difference with that is with alcohol, we generally know how it affects people. We have science to determine when exactly people are too inebriated. But for THC, that isn't entirely the case, correct?
That's absolutely correct. This is a big problem, particularly as it comes to public safety. So if a police officer stops you and suspects you of drunk driving, they can test you and they know what your blood alcohol level is precisely. And the law is very clear. When it comes to being stopped by a cop who thinks you might have been impaired by marijuana, it's a totally different thing because you can take a blood test and you can test for THC, but they don't know when you last smoked marijuana. So, for example, if you were to leave right now and in 20 minutes get into an accident and they took a blood reading of your blood reading and found THC, they don't know whether you smoked it 10 minutes ago or 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So right now, there is not a really good sobriety test for marijuana. UC San Diego is working on that. They were given about $2 million from the state to try to find a better way of measuring it and a better way of looking for specific signs. They're doing things like right now, like having study participants come in, smoke marijuana, and then get into driving simulators so they can see, how does marijuana affect people's driving? Can they come up with a better way of really determining that? They're also looking at things that might be a sign if you're high. One of them is like really primitive. It involves some people think that you have a higher pain tolerance with marijuana, so they have people place their fist in a bucket of ice to see how long they can comfortably stay in that bucket of ice, which I had no idea.
If it works, it works. And also, this is a recent development with the UT to kind of focus on marijuana coverage as it becomes something that is available to everyone. So why don't you walk us through kind of the plans that you have as a reporter to make sure that San Diegans know what this new industry is?
So I've spent a lot of time getting to know people in the industry and going to the marijuana dispensaries to get a sense of what they're like. I call them dispensaries because, as you know, medical marijuana is legal in California and has been since 1996, but recreational hasn't. So many of these stores that have focused on medical will switch to doing both or primarily focusing on recreational. That's a potentially large audience, and what we want to do is give people good information so they can be smart users, smart parents. I have some real concerns about the packaging of the edible marijuana because it looks like anything else. Yeah. So if you left it laying around your house, a child might get into it, or if someone came over, they might think that bag of popcorn is just popcorn, not weed that is covered or infused with marijuana. Mm-hmm. You just, by looking, you simply can't tell the difference. The candy's the same way. The chocolate is the same way. And you can get sick real quickly if you take too much of this. And the edibles work differently than like if you're smoking it. Smoking it is pretty fast in its effect. But with edible marijuana, the time it takes to have an effect on you can be 30 minutes, 60 minutes, maybe even 90 minutes. So you might eat something, time passes and you think, well, it's not having any effect on me. And then you take more and more and you get yourself into a real bad situation really quickly. Mm-hmm. What that means is you can get really sick. A lot of people who take too much of this double over in pain and they become really nauseous. Some of them end up in ERs.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the sale of marijuana, there's a lot of discussion about its supposed health benefits, but obviously, that's something that is still up for debate. You're working on a story right now about this. Could you walk us through some of the findings that you've found about the medical research and what marijuana can actually do to help people?
This is a really serious issue. Earlier this month, the Food and Drug Administration sent out really big warning letters to 5 companies that were claiming that marijuana could either treat, prevent, or cure cancer. It cannot. And that was like a cautionary tale for people they need to understand what marijuana is about. Now, there are ways to find out. The National Academy of Sciences earlier this year released a 468-page study that presented an overview of what is known to date about the therapeutic and medicinal value of marijuana, and it's a very, very mixed picture. There's a lot of promising data in there when it comes to pain management. It does appear that marijuana can be used to help manage chronic pain. It can be used, it appears, to help with some aspects of multiple sclerosis. It can be used, doctors tell me, in some areas to deal with fibromyalgia. There's some clinical data emerging that it can be used for arthritis. So there are positive effects to it. But by and large, what the report says is we don't really know. There is not sufficient evidence. And the reason there's not sufficient evidence is the government has really tamped down marijuana research. They've not provided a lot of money for it. It can be very, very difficult for a researcher to get marijuana to use in specific testing. And they don't want to just go out on the street and get it just any place because it's against federal law. So, it would endanger the research grants. The report also noted what a lot of people have been saying for a long time, that marijuana use, particularly chronic marijuana use, can have a lot of negative effects on adolescents. I don't think it's widely understood, but the human brain doesn't fully form in many people until they're almost 25 years old or longer. And the science is showing that it can have a lot of effects on memory, learning, cognition in younger people, and that they can linger, and that it can be, I don't want to call it a gateway drug. I don't think it's right to do that based on what I'm reading, because that would imply that it's broadly a gateway. The use of marijuana can lead to other things, but there's still all these uncertainties, Daniel, about what it does. But the thing that jumps out at me is the potential effects on adolescents. Now, the new laws are meant to deal with that. You can't buy recreational marijuana unless you're 21 years old. And again, we go back to the packaging, and it's meant to be in a way that doesn't appeal to younger people. Whether that occurs or not, no one knows. There's also a lot of questions that are really fundamental. For example, does smoking cannabis cause lung cancer? This report by the National Academy doesn't give a conclusive answer, but it suggests that the smoking might not be as bad as some people assume. But doctors also say, conversely, that, well, it can cause chronic coughing and other things that are associated with simply using smoke. There's also the issue of vaporizers. If you go into a lot of these stores, they really promote the use of vaporizers, because the idea is that you're heating the marijuana instead of burning it, and it becomes vapor instead of smoke. But one of the doctors I spoke to said, be really careful with that, because there still are irritants in the vapor. There are chemicals within it. So how much do we actually know? Well, not enough to be conclusive about it.
And also, let's say one of your friends comes up to you and said, "Hey, Gary, I know you're working on this story. I want to give it a shot. I haven't consumed weed in a long time." What would you recommend for someone like that who wants to engage recreationally but is doing so in a kind of controlled environment?
This is a tough question. I stand by the law. So the law says this is legal now, and it emphasizes that you need to do it in private or in some places where it's been specified that it's legal to do it. So that's the very, very first thing that I would tell a person is to make sure that they're doing it in some private place, which puts them in accord with the law. I would also tell them, and that's a really good question. I'm glad you say that, maybe someone who hasn't used it in a while. Scientists say that the potency of marijuana has grown significantly stronger in recent decades. I was in college in the 1970s. The reports I've read say that the THC level at the time was about 8%, 10%. Today we hear that it's probably double that and maybe as much as 30%. And it depends on what the strain is and where you get it. If you're going to be smoking, be really careful about where you obtain it. Go to one of the good dispensaries. Take some time to find out which businesses are good businesses. I've seen a lot of variation commercially. As I've talked to people, I thought that vendor sounds like they really have it together and they're talking clearly to the public and letting them know the upside and the downside. And in other cases where I didn't see that at all. So do it in private. Make sure you buy it from a vendor. Make sure that you understand liability. If you're buying edibles, if you're leaving them around and someone gets into a problem, you might be held liable for that. And don't get into a car. I mean, under no circumstances should you drive an automobile. I hear this kind of smug remark where people say that marijuana has never killed anybody. Well, maybe if I'm just smoking weed and sitting on a couch, it doesn't kill me. But it has killed and maimed people who have gotten behind the wheel of a car. And a lot of people mix weed with alcohol. And so that just makes it even worse. So the safety around this I think, is paramount. I don't think it's a bad drug, Daniel. I think it just needs to be responsibly used. And the California Medical Association essentially said the same thing when they came out in support of Proposition 64 last year. They were saying, well, we think that this is going to really make it less likely that people buy black market drugs where they don't know what the source is. It'll make it less likely that children will have access to it. So to me, it's just common sense.
Mm-hmm. And also, let's talk a little bit about the employment aspect of this. What are the laws in California that may protect or may get someone in trouble for having THC in their system?
I think the Proposition 64, which made recreational marijuana legal, passed in part because they kept in a provision that said that employer could still fire you if you tested positive for marijuana. Now, one of the big issues we're going to see here is whether companies are going to stop drug testing. In Colorado, the number of companies, a percentage of the workforce that do drug testing has fallen. Now, part of that has to do with the economy. The economy is very strong in Colorado. They have trouble finding people for many jobs. And so some companies have said, maybe we don't do pre-testing. I think there will also be a pressure because millennials are pretty accepting as a group of marijuana, and they don't want to be told by companies that they have to go through a drug test for something that they consider to be pretty normal and innocuous. So I think I don't know what every company is going to do. You should know that you can be fired. It's clear you can be fired. And the people who rent property to you, they can say, no, you cannot smoke marijuana in this place because I own it and I say it's my property. So those two things are very key. Yeah, people shouldn't be cavalier about it. You can lose your job.
Mm-hmm. And also, you mentioned this earlier about how dispensaries selling different kinds of strains and different styles of marijuana. How exact is that science? Because you've mentioned multiple times that it doesn't have the same effect on people. So how do we know that certain varietals have certain effects on people? Or is that just kind of the best we can come up with?
I don't think that we do. I hear a lot of the people in the industry say, oh, we do testing. We have a sense of where this comes from. In some cases, companies that are selling it are involved on some level with the cultivators. They know them. But as I've talked to people, I've gotten the sense that they're trying to sell me a product. Do they really know that this particular strain has this, a specific amount of THC in it as opposed to the strain in the next jar? I don't think that is well known at all. I saw something online in the past couple of days that also concerned me. There was an article that said, here are the best 5 strains to deal with depression. So some people use marijuana to treat depression. Well, how does anybody know that? It's not like the medical community has gotten together and said, we tested this and we found that these specific strains are best for our depression. So there is a lot of uncertainty. The new law is going to change that to some degree because it's mandating testing. What is the quality of this marijuana? What is actually in it? And believe it or not, one of the big leaders here is the city of San Diego. I don't think of San Diego as being a liberal community like, say, San Francisco, but San Diego has created a supply chain which has been very specific about laying out the permitting process for things like cultivation, transport, testing. So in San Diego, we might be a bit better off than some other cities because the city jumped into it really quickly. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about whether there's going to be a big change. So marijuana still carries a stigma. A lot of people won't try it because of the stigma attached to it. And I'll be interested to see whether it changes. The fact that some of these stores do look like a Starbucks might appeal to a lot of people. I keep hearing over and over that a lot of millennials and people that are Gen X are talking to their parents and saying, hey, you should reconsider. There are legitimate medical reasons to be thinking about it. We're dealing with the baby boomers like myself, who have all kinds of aches and pains and other problems that might benefit from marijuana. We have to figure out what they really are. So there are some reasons where it might take hold, but I don't know, Daniel, whether it's going to overcome the stigma it still has. One of the things that might loosen that stigma is the edibles, because we're food crazy in this country and in this county, and a lot of the food looks really delicious and it's super appealing. I mean, the candies I've seen are something else.
Yeah, Thorn Street has a beer with cannabinol in it, and Manitonon Park has a cocktail with it too.
It's amazing. There's a little company called Treat Yourself that makes these little mini toaster pastries, and they look like the elegant food that you see on magazine covers. I talked to the owners of that company, and they said, we're trying to make it more socially acceptable. And they're also positioning it as a wellness product, and they're particularly positioning it as a wellness product for women. The company claims that they think women have largely been left out of this whole discussion. And they may have a point in that. So it may become better socialized, but I just don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, Gary, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Refocus. If you've enjoyed this conversation, join us every Monday where host Daniel Wheaton takes a look through the news and focuses in on a topic that affects San Diegans. And if you're a fan of this podcast, please take some time to check out our other work on the UT Podcast Network. San Diego News Fix gives you top local headlines in under 6 minutes, 7 days a week, delivered straight to you for your morning commute. And if you're a sports fan or fantasy football expert, columnist Kevin Acey and Eddie Brown host America's Finest Fantasy Football, released weekly during football season. And in partnership with Pacific Magazine and Facebook group Eating and Drinking San Diego, when it comes to cocktails, craft beer, and whatever the locals are pouring, your cup is always half full with Kiss My Glass. And Dish It Up, a podcast serving the latest news, trends, and events related to the San Diego food scene, both released monthly. I'm producer Laura Hockley. Thank you for listening.